education in the region. Non-state armed groups are strengthening their foothold and seeing this pandemic as an opportunity to strike. Armed attacks increasing by almost 40% since COVID-19 was declared a global pandemic. IDPs are increasing, SGBV and child marriage is also on the rise. And on top of that, humanitarian assistance and access is severely constrained to the most hard-to-reach areas. So this debate will look into how this bleak context has a disproportionate negative impact on adolescent girls and the ways forward through the girls' own perspectives of the protection challenges and the situation that they are living. So with us in the panel, we have Deputy Foreign Minister Marianne Hagen. We have Karel Bartpoli, Secretary General in Plan Norway, Morten Bøas, Research Professor at NUPI, and also with us online we have Sahel Cluster Director Fatimata Hydera. So before going into the debate, we'll kick it off by some opening questions to each panelist before we'll start discussing these topics. And also remember that you can send in your questions on Facebook to all the panelists. So in 2018, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs launched its Sahel strategy, which sets quite ambitious goals for Norway's humanitarian involvement in the region. Norway is becoming an important actor in providing humanitarian and development aid, including working to increase girls' access to education and reproductive health. And in April this year, the status report was published for the 2 first years of implementation of the Sahel strategy. And in the report that we're launching today, girls express an increased need for protection from violence and harmful practices, as well as access to education. So on that backdrop, could you say something about how Norway has been contributing to strengthen girls' rights in those areas, and then maybe taking into account the findings of the status report?
Thank you. Let me first thank you for addressing the protection concerns of children and young people in the Sahel region, including girls' rights to education and a safe learning environment. I appreciate the opportunity to be here again for the launch of your important and timely report. The humanitarian situation in the central Sahel is deeply worrying. With spiraling violence, frequent attacks on civilians, and human rights violations, food insecurity, lack of access to basic services, and huge increases in displacement throughout the whole region, both internally and across the borders. This is a protracted and complex crisis, and it's getting worse. On top of this, you have the corona pandemic making life even harder for millions. The populations are experiencing a situation of great stress, and above all, this is now a protection crisis. The significance of the work that you do and your local partners to keep boys and girls in school and to protect them from sexual and gender-based violence is of the utmost importance. So what do we do as a government? First, we support you, the civil society organizations, as well as the Red Cross movement and the UN, to save lives, to alleviate suffering, and to protect human dignity and of the affected population. We have increased our humanitarian support for the Central Sahel region in 2020, and we will consider further support in the near future. Second, we connect our humanitarian efforts and the longer-term investments in development and peace building. Last year, Norway's total assistance to the region was approximately 1 billion Norwegian kroner, and we lean both on our humanitarian strategy and the Sahel strategy in our response. Third, we take an active role on the international arenas to promote stability, development, and enhance respect for humanitarian law and human rights. And we're looking forward to the upcoming international conference on Sahel on October 20th, where our Minister of Foreign Affairs will participate. And we do hope that this event will help raise attention and mobilize more resources across the triple nexus that the crisis needs and the people deserves. Fourth, we give priority to education, in particular, education for girls. Our funding for education programs through different partners has increased substantially. We appreciate our cooperation with Plan and the NRC, among other actors in this field. And finally, the protection against SGBV and harmful practices and access to sexual and reproductive health services are key priorities for Norway, also in the Sahel. For example, we work together with UNFPA in Niger and Mali to promote girls' and women's rights in this field. And we will keep this issue very high on our agenda and contribute to strengthening the operational humanitarian responses. This year, globally, we allocated 325 million Norwegian kroner from the humanitarian budget to end SGBV and humanitarian crisis. These are but a few examples of our efforts in the region, and I'm looking forward to the discussion on the very complexities and the challenges that we lay before us. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that. That's a lot of useful points to pick up on through the debate. For now, we'll move swiftly over to looking at the girls' own perceptions of the protection challenges that they're facing. So please, Dr. Fatimata Hydera, could you please take us through the main findings of the report that we're launching today?
Thank you, Inja. Dear friends, I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk on behalf of Plan International West and Central Africa. I am Fatimata Hydera. I come from Tombouctou in Mali, one of the areas most affected by the Sahel crisis. During all my life, I have seen girls and women in the Sahel suffer gender inequalities that limit their protection and education. I spent the last 10 years observing the growing and complex changing affecting children, young people, especially girls across the Sahel. I see how girls suffer the fear of the armed groups, child marriage, and losing their possibility for an education. The study aimed at capturing the voices of the girls and young women affected by violence and insecurity in the recurrent crisis in the Sahel region. It is informed by and centered upon the voices and experiences of girls at risk in some of the world's most volatile and dangerous locations. It also includes interviews with adolescent boys, parents, and other key members of their communities in order to better understand the social context and expectation that girls experiences and shape their lives. The report showed that the needs of adolescent girls in the context are both unseen and unmet. Their age and gender make them particularly vulnerable to the surrounding violence. However, their voices are rarely heard and their right to security, education, health are not fulfilled. The research explores how adolescent girls understand the unique impact that crisis has had upon them. The main concerns expressed by the girls are as follows. Girls live in fears of violence. The fear of violence is one of the main concerns for girls we have interviewed. Many of them have seen their parents or community members killed in front of them. Others have been separated from their family, which severely increase their vulnerability. They express fear of physical violence, sexual violence, child early and forced marriage, and marital rape. They also say that the time of crisis lead to an increase in sexual violence and exploitation. Girls wish to go to school. Schools have been one of the primary targets of terrorist attacks in both Mali and Burkina Faso, and many remain closed. In some areas, although children still go to school, they and their teachers are often afraid. Furthermore, in many areas, girls are kept home from school when they reach an age where it is not well seen that they mix with boys. Girls struggle to stay physically and mentally healthy. The girls that we talk to express that they struggle with food insecurity and have one meal a day. Many of them have little or no access to information about sexual and reproductive health, and in the area of mental health especially, have restricted access to health services. This combined with the trauma that many have experienced with health concern. The lack of health services and fulfillment of health rights are common in the region, but has become aggravated during the COVID-19 pandemic. Girls have little say over their lives. The adolescent girls in crisis studies shows that during emergencies, adolescent girls are increasingly subject to social control. Girls want to earn money. Hand in hand with the girls' restricted mobilities goes their inability to earn money. They can no longer land work because of insecurity or because they have had to flee, and they can no longer trade since local markets are often target for attacks. Adolescent girls talk about their needs and their anxieties, but also about their hopes. They are full of ambition and the ability to envisage a better future. The following recommendations are based on that girls have told us about their experiences. Schools, teachers, and students must be protected, and the particular barriers that affect adolescent girls' access to education be recognized and moved. Access to information about sexual and reproductive health, contraceptive supplies, and essential medicines must be prioritized by humanitarian organizations and local authorities. Gender-based discrimination must be tackled, and this includes supporting behavioral change through community mobilization and engaging with adolescent boys and men as advocates for girls' rights. Livelihood, the opportunity for adolescent girls to earn money must be protected, and vocational training and support for small businesses made available. Hoping that the present report will attract the attention of the international community of the Sahel humanitarian challenges, and in particular, the challenges faced by adolescent girls. I would like, on behalf of Plan International, to express my sincere gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fatim. And as you say, and as the report stipulates as well, we see that the protection and education barriers are highly intertwined, and access to education affects protection and vice versa. And Plan Norway's humanitarian strategy is very much focused on an integrated approach to tackle such issues, seeing quality education as a protective measure. So maybe, Karilena, you could say something about what this means for the way that Plan is working in the field in the Sahel to tackle protection and education threats.
Absolutely, thank you. Like we heard from Fatim here, this complex situation that we have had described for us and affect all areas of girls and adolescent girls in particular's lives. And they say that they want education. They say they want access to sexual and reproductive rights. They say that they need protection. So these are the clear voices from the adolescent girls themselves. Now, in such a complex setting, there are no easy fixes. And our sort of education and protection program is based on that realization. So a complex situation need a holistic approach. We cannot work in the silos of leaving education and protection as two different things. It has to be a coherent program. And this is, you see that when girls attend school, they are less subject to harmful practices. We see that
child marriage is then postponed with some years. You see that girls there are fewer teenage pregnancies, and then likewise you see if this happens, girls drop out of school, they lose access to education, and then become more subjugated to sexual and gender-based violence that sort of typically happens in the local communities and families. So these things are really connected. So we have this approach that also is supported by the MFA, but is a sort of flagship programming that Plan has been working with over some time, and we call it sort of quality education as protective measure. And from the get-go, we designed the programs with education and protection in mind, and it's based on three main pillars. It's safe education, access to that, safe schools, etc., and the quality of teaching and the learning. And this has to do with teachers being aware of the security situation, being aware of protection measures that need to be taken, and being aware of especially the adolescent girls situation. And then finally, the involvement of the local community, because you need the local community to be involved in rebuilding the schools, in maintaining the schools, and getting, especially for us, it's important to give voice to the adolescent girls. We see them drop out more than boys to begin with, and now being particularly vulnerable, and having the girls, the community, getting the girls back to school. And then we also have protection focal points in the schools, working with, again, the community. So we can refer cases, because we can't just have all these atrocities being committed in schools against girls and not refer the cases, make them known, try to do something about it. And the girls also say they want the psychological support as well after having been victims of this. And this is sometimes forgotten when you're in such a complex situation. So holistic approach, working with education as protection, interconnected entities, and just the sort of final word, this also, having education also gives you some normality in a really complex situation for girls and boys.
Thank you so much. And obviously, leading that approach in a context where the insecurity situation is increasingly worrying is also increasingly important. And on that note, seeing that, the numbers are crazy. You have a 7,000% increase in civilian fatalities in Burkina Faso between 2018 and 2019. And Martin was commenting on the status report of the MFA. You said that it is very easy to say what the Sahel needs, but it is tremendously difficult to say how. So how would you answer that question yourself, taking into account the recent developments that we're seeing?
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation to be part of the launch of such an important report. Yeah, I sort of should have known that statement would come back to haunt me at some time. And yes, it is easier to say what they need than sort of trying to stipulate how to actually achieve this. That said, I do think that if there is one thing that the last 7 years tells us, that's the period from 2013 up until today, is that there has been a massive focus on the Sahel. It has never been larger, in fact. The Sahel is now sort of one of the top issues in almost all important capitals around the world. There is more money being spent, at least, not necessarily in the Sahel, but at least on the Sahel. There is more international presence on the ground. There is a huge UN mission there, 12,000 personnel approximately. You have large EU missions, and you can just add on and add on. But the security situation is deteriorating. That means that at least we have to start asking some questions about what we are doing. And on the top of that, we have COVID-19. I personally do not believe that attacks has increased due to COVID-19. I think they would have increased anyway due to how the whole shifts on the battlefields. That said, COVID-19 effects will come here, but perhaps mostly indirectly, due to the fact that there will be less resources for assistance, but also the sheer fact that also in the Sahel you have important diaspora populations who are sending back important remittances, And these are working in sectors that will be very hardly hit by COVID-19 effects in Europe and elsewhere where these people is working. So they are going to send back much less money than they used to. I mean, there are already studies showing that in parts of Africa, the level of remittances sent back from diaspora population has dropped by 50%. This could have dramatic effects also in the Sahel. That said, okay, back to your question. How do we? What should we do? I mean, I think that the report, at least, and the conversation so far talks to at least something that we urgently need to focus more on, and that is the need for protection. And I would very much point towards community protection. That is also, in my point of view, the best ways to protect girls and young women through a community perspective, because you cannot see the deteriorating security situation and the precarity of the situation of young women and girls in isolation from the community. So you need to have a community perspective there. And we also need a community perspective to the whole idea of stabilization and security in the Sahel, because I do not think that we will ever be able to defeat the jihadi rebels on the battlefield. Because this is an archetypical asymmetrical warfare, where they know very well that they don't have to win. They just have to be able to survive one day longer than we are able to or willing to take the cost of staying there. And their goal is to make that cost very high for us to continue to be there. That means that we need to find an other way of sort of bringing this thing around. And my suggestion would be to turn also several of the military interventions that currently are taking place, both MINUSMA but also Operation Barkhane, with a much larger focus on community protection and less a focus of trying to take out jihadi rebels and jihadi leaders. That is possible, but it's going to be very hard work, I think, because we need to find a way of breaking the levels of local integration that some of these jihadi rebels currently are achieving in parts of Mali, in parts of Burkina, but also increasingly in Niger, in the Tillabéri region, for example. And people will turn to whoever they think will be able to offer them some level of basic protection. And the problem here is that too many communities feel that they are caught in between a rock and a hard place. The rock may be the jihadi rebels, but the hard place is also the state that they're living in. And something needs to be done also with state approaches here. For example, this stereotyping of young Fulani men as either jihadi rebels or wannabe jihadi rebels. This is completely counterproductive, and it also is a huge security problem for the communities. So there is a lot, there are things we can start doing here. And at least in Mali there is, and the coup is not necessarily good news, but the coup at least has created a new conversation around some of these issues that I think it's important that international stakeholders like Norway try to sort of support this lingering national dialogue about how you can find a Malian solution to this, which in my point of view includes the possibility of looking more seriously at negotiations, not with all the jihadi rebels, but at least with those with a strong local connection. I think I should stop there.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I think that's also a good transition to kick off the debate. We'll start the first thematic bulk with the security situation, as we see that this is very much the fundament for a lot of the protection challenges that these adolescent girls are facing. And indeed, also in the report, what they highlight is that the pervasive insecurity situation impacts on all areas of their lives, and that peace building is really a key priority. And you also, in your intervention, Marianne Hagen, you mentioned how Norway has been investing 1 billion Norwegian crowns throughout the 2 last years, and there's a lot of international engagement and focus, as you also pointed to, Martin. But we see that the security development is going the wrong way, that local recruitment is on the rise, non-state armed groups are fastening the grip, and that is also very much linked to the absence of strong states that can deliver something to the communities. So is there a need to sort of rethink the way we're working with state building and peace building, in your opinion, since it's not going so well already?
Let me just at the offset start by saying that I agree with Morten. It's definitely more easy to describe the problem than to come up with the solutions here. And I also agree that the development is definitely not going in the right direction. That doesn't necessarily mean that everything we are trying to do is the wrong answer. We are there in the region for the long term, and the security situation is definitely one out of 4 areas that we have to cope with. And Norway is, as you all know, supporting the MINUSMA, running the Bifrost camp, and also initiated and are participating in the rotation program scheme for air transportation. And I do think that is an important effort also in the future. We're also supporting with the EU response, and we are looking at the new the coup d'etat and the new government. We are, of course, standing with the international community in the condemnation of a coup d'etat, but we're also supporting the ECOWAS negotiation efforts. And if we are looking at the 18 months transition period into some civilian government, that could be one important step forward. We don't know that yet, but still, I think that supporting the ECOWAS is important, a measure for providing more security in the region. And then you have the weak state situation, and how do we go by strengthening the state institutions? And that is really, I think, the big question. And we have not been successful so far. I'm taking note of Morten's point that we have to work with local communities. And when it comes to protection, which is one of Norway's top priorities, one of 4 priorities when we take our seat on the Security Council, that has to be locally based. Girls can only be protected, children can only be protected where they actually are. So I think that's a very good input that we have to work on, find more effective measures on the local level, because that's the only place we can actually provide protection.
Morten?
Yes. No, I mean, I'm not saying that everything that we are doing that has been done over these 7 years in the Sahel is wrong. I mean, my main criticism is to the approach that has been taken to security. And there is a lot of good things that we are doing. There's a lot of good things that Norway also is supporting. Plan and others are doing good things. The problem is just that it's drowning in a deteriorating security situation. So we are not able to reach and grasp these tangible benefits that could be there for the Malian, for the Nigerian, for the Burkinabe population, because it's drowning in this deteriorating security situation. And since this security situation has deteriorated, even if there has been a huge international military presence, then we need to look at, is there another way of doing this? And I believe that there is, to a much larger focus on community protection than trying to sort of kill jihadi rebels. Because yes, every now and then we are able to kill, we kill some, the French kill some, every now and then we are even able to take out some of the leaders, but new ones emerge. Because this is happening in the vacuum of an extremely fragile state that is not able to deliver not even basic security to its populations. That said, I do think that there are small steps that one could start taking. There are efforts that has been on the way in Mali for quite some time, dialogue between different communities and also some of the non-state armed groups like the Katiba Masin and others, where one has been able to negotiate some sort of humanitarian access, where one has been able to negotiate also some reconciliation between groups that has different ethnic groups that has been fighting each other. And there is a lot of these small initiatives. What is lacking is a larger plan of how to scale this up, first to a regional level, for example, in central Mali, and then later up to a national level. And here I think there could be a role for Norway and other donors with that kind of community protection perspective of looking at how together with both international partners and local partners on the ground, that one could not take over these processes because one shouldn't, but how one could assist and try to facilitate them.
Did you have a comment as well?
Yeah. Well, it's a complex situation again, but I think this area is one of the areas where you really could put, the triple nexus agenda into work. Because just to remember sitting in the Niger office of Plan, looking with the map of every area that Plan is active with some intervention, and they were telling us which areas that you could work with long-term development and which areas you could work with humanitarian. And the picture was changing by the day. They would say, this community used to be long-term, now it's unstable. And it was just changing. And I think for us as, actors on the ground, with local partners, with Plan staff, you have to be able to work within that triple nexus, actually, with humanitarian response, with long-term development response, and with peace building. And it is complex, but it's actually that's the environment that you're maneuvering in. So the triple nexus and any nexus discussion, I feel, in our field is mostly talk. But if there is a way to actually put that into practice and a place where it should be put into practice, it's here. And then also would like to sort of again return to when you work out, and it's great to hear the emphasis on protection in local communities, but again, you need to listen to every stakeholder, and the adolescent girls will keep coming back to that because they are not taken into account when you develop humanitarian responses, even when you do long-term response, and they're not seen as the immediate need. When you are surrounded with so many immediate needs, whether it's food insecurity or violence and death, you forget it. But it's key in and to stable societies to have girls not become young mothers without education, without income opportunities, because that's not the future mothers that you want in an area like that or anywhere.
I guess that's also, sorry, did you want to
come? Yeah, I just want to add another layer to the complexity, bringing in consequences of climate change, because that's also a multiplier of the conflicts and the changes that you see from a day-to-day basis, where it's stability, where it's suddenly not anymore. Food security has to be also key to this. So that's another area where Norway is investing and working through partners is on the climate resilient agriculture, for instance, which is both job creation and it's all about presenting a better alternative than the armed non-state armed groups. So creating jobs and providing food security. I think that is also very important. And then I absolutely agree when it comes to listening to women, listening to girls. And that's another area where I think that Norway can actually make a difference is in the peace processes. The inclusion of women, that is also the second of our priority areas, including women in peace processes. And I think that is really, really important. On the local level, but also on the national levels. And we are working with the mediation team from Mali, and they were here in Oslo, bringing women mediators with them. And I think that is also providing them with examples of how we have solved, issues in Norway and experiences that we have from other peace and negotiations and reconciliation processes around the world. So bringing that experience to those very capable women is also, I think, one thing, one more thing that we can do that takes us in a positive direction.
Yeah, and helps making also the program interventions more efficient and also tapping into what you said in the beginning, Martin, building sort of the trust of the local communities as well, because we see that these states are non-functional, they're not delivering on what people expect. And not to make you as a quotation machine, but you say a lot of stuff that you can use. And you also said,
he doesn't mind.
No, you also said that Norway and other actors need to be smarter in terms of doing namely that. I mean, you have the long-term engagement, which is obviously very important in such a high complexity of security threats, but you also need to give them something as a sort of competing with the non-state armed groups. And what are kind of the trade-offs in doing that with these long-term engagement that is necessary, but also that kind of responding to the immediate needs? What are the considerations and trade-offs here?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there will be trade-offs, but I mean, when the situation is as dire as it is now, yes, I mean, all stakeholders here need to have a long-term perspective. Unfortunately, I mean, for the local communities who lives in the midst of this, they are in the process of losing that long-term perspective, because you see, the long-term perspective is something that we can afford. We have the luxury of taking that long-term perspective. And you're in the midst of such a dire crisis, I mean, your whole focus has to be on survival, on muddling through. So that places people into a very sort of tactical agency, where it's all about trying to survive to the next day, basically. So the question then becomes, we need to respond to that immediate crisis, but we need to find a way of responding to that immediate crisis in such a way that we, at least over time through our immediate responses, also can contribute to giving communities a longer time perspective. And for them being able to look at this and their livelihood situation also over a longer time. And of course, there is also where the issue of girls and young women comes in, because I mean, communities need to see that there is a point in investing in this. As long as they don't see that point, they're not going to do it, basically. Because I mean, people are, when you're trying to survive, I mean, sort of the question of sort of a girl going to school or not is not necessarily something that is seen as sort of an existentialistic issue, but it could be that. And I mean, it was, I had a conversation with yesterday on Skype with some colleagues from Niger, based on a session that they had just before the weekend with herder associations from Tillabéri. And they said something very, very interesting, which I think is worth pointing out, and that is due to the precarity of the whole security situation in Tillabéri right now. It's not the male herders anymore that goes to the market. It's they are sending the women instead to the market, because they are at least less likely to be attacked either by the Nigerian security forces or by the rebels. And I mean, this is sort of, again, a community that is coming up with a functional way, but also a functional way that very much is changing the whole idea of what is men's work and what is women's work. So, and these are, again, things that one could try to sort of attach other kind of programming to. Because I do believe that, I mean, if this kind of programming is to work, it needs to be sort of be based on that we are responding to a local response, not the other way around, because it needs to be anchored locally and owned by local communities. And that is, of course, the challenge now with the security situation. So, I mean, again, everything sort of is meshed into each other, and it all has become a layer, like an onion of different sort of security issues. But we need to start sort of not necessarily peeling the onion, but finding a way of sort of making that onion slightly less big than it currently is.
Yeah. And is that also a question of sort of doing a more step-by-step approach, meaning that you're setting maybe more realistic goals in the short term, so that you would say, instead of now we're ending child marriage, we're going to increase the age of child brides by 2 years and take it sort of following the local development? Is that a way of thinking in order to sort of be more efficient?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's how we are working precisely. I mean, the reports say that instead of actually achieving the SDG goal of combating child marriages by 2030, now there will be an increase with 13 million more child marriages, and especially in the Sahel region, obviously. So you know, that goal right now seems very hairy, but to actually postpone the age with a couple of years, it makes a big difference. And then if a girl gets married and if she gets pregnant, to make sure that there is offered education to her situation, so that she can actually go back into school. This rarely happens, but this is extremely important. So it's postponing the age makes actually quite a huge difference, to have the girls be just a little bit older. And of course, some of these areas have the highest prevalence of child marriage to begin with. I mean, before COVID-19 and before the worsening of the situation. So, and the situation for women. I mean, Niger, we said this the last time we met, to discussing the same topic. You know, the average number of children that a woman in Niger
gives birth to is 7. So this is a high number, and a lot of the women who give birth are girls. So they will have some physical situations that will follow them through life that really actually is not healthy. So there's a lot of reasons for postponing just a few years, also so that you give birth when your body actually is ready for it. So these are important goals in the regular situation in the Sahel region, and especially now. One last question on this thematic block before we go to the second thematic block of the debate. All of this, the situation that we've been talking about now, directly constrains humanitarian access, as I mentioned in the beginning. So the question then is, what are future scenarios to work with non-state armed groups? If the aim is to increase girls' access to education and protection, do we need to relate more directly to them? I mean, Martin, you've mentioned earlier that negotiations with non-state armed groups is already happening at the local level. Could you say something more about what you think about that?
It is already happening, and it has been going on for quite some while, particularly in the Mopti area of Mali. And I think it would need to continue, but one should try to sort of scale up parts of this dialogue. And the main opposition movement in Mali, the M5 movement, I mean, there are representatives there who has been calling for this for a long time. I mean, and I do believe that among the Malian population, there is a relatively solid support for negotiations with all armed actors that they define as Malians. So they are said they are drawing a line against who they say are Algerians. That is the Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, and they are drawing a line against this group who call itself the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. Otherwise, they say that we need to negotiate. We need to find a negotiated solution to this. And if you look at sort of how long it has taken the international community to realize this in Afghanistan, I mean, it would be very sad if it took the same amount of time in the Sahel. I don't see any alternative to it. And in fact, at least with some of these groups, like I mentioned before, the Katiba Masina, which operates in central Mali, they are at least have something that may look like a political platform, because they're also at least at times talking about the governance of natural resources. And that could be sort of a stepping stone to also talking to them about other issues. And after all, we have to remember that, yes, I mean, Mali is a Muslim country. It's also a country where people tend to be quite, particularly in the rural areas, quite socially conservative. But it's also a country of pragmatism. And there has always been a mix in Mali between sort of social conservatism and pragmatism. And that is, again, something that can be used in order to have conversations around also the issue of girls and young women education and so on. And as was pointed out there, I mean, just hiking up the average sort of marrying age by 1 year will have a lot of positive results. And I think we need to sort of focus on that stepping stone approach to this.
On that note, let's go more into depth on the sort of what we see from the report, how adolescent girls are particularly vulnerable in this context that we've been discussing now, especially now with COVID, but already established pre-existing vulnerabilities that are now reinforced. Fatim, you're there? Fatimata Hydera, could you say something about, because one of the things that we're seeing in the report is that girls are held back by restrictive norms and attitudes in the local communities, and we already talked about the value of local communities. Could you say something about those mechanisms, and how are you, for instance, in the field as frontliner workers working with the local communities to address such issues?
Please, can you again repeat your question?
So the question would be how frontline workers like you are working in the field with local communities to counteract the effect of restrictive norms and attitudes that are coloring the girls and their opportunities for protection education. And so how do you work with local communities, basically?
Okay. Thank you very much. Just understood, and I think I agree with a different debate. I think the most important thing is we need to work with the communities. This is the local communities. This is very, very important, at high importance. And the key element also is to give girls voices, to give them the needed space, to involve them in everything what we are doing, not doing things for them, but doing things with them as actors. This is very, very important. We need also to empower these girls, to give them the needed capacities and skills. And also plan work with the parents also of these boys and girls also. This is very important, working with the parent, working with the community and the religious leaders, because if you want to transform and doing a very deep gender transformative work, we need to work with the local communities, the leaders, traditional leaders, local leaders, and the religious leaders. We need also to work with the young people, the girls and the boys, not only having the girls, but working with both sides. And also plan, aim also to educate girls to understand better their right to decide what happened to their body. What we talk about sexual reproductive health. This is also a very important element. Another element is also what we are doing in the field plan, also to prioritize the funding for initiative that can stop, as you said just right now, early child marriage and forced marriage, like element like FGM, the female genital mutilation. And we need to do this work in terms of short, long, and medium term. This is very, very also important. And finally, we need also to encourage the community to speak about against the risk and the realities of all these harmful measures and what is happening with the girls in this situation, and to challenge the discriminatory reason for which we are practicing all these elements against girls in the Sahel. These are some elements what I can share with you quickly.
Thank you so much. I think that's a really good opening starter for this. One of the things that you highlight, Fatim, is the need to involve adolescent girls in policy response and development. And what we see in the report is that girls are not systematically a part of humanitarian assistance. And this is something that is enshrined in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, for instance, but not necessarily targeted. How could Norway sort of strengthen girls' participation in such processes? Now also with the Security Council mandate, could you have a focus on youth, peace and security, not only women, peace and security?
That is one of the issues, youth, peace and security, alongside women, peace and security agenda. I think that this is kind of obvious, we have to work through our local partners. For instance, the Norwegian Church Aid is very well positioned in the north of Mali, having very good relationships, communication with religious leaders and local leaders. And I think that is one model for moving forward. But at the same time, you are describing a very volatile situation where it changes. Local community, one day it's up, second day it's deteriorating again. So in combination with strengthening the local communities and talking to the local leaders, involving girls at the local levels, protecting, providing protection at the local level, we have to work on the national level. We have to strengthen the institutions, because if we are to move, a big step forward, there has to be accountability for states, and it has to be rule of law, it has to be law enforcement, and has to be accountability. So there's no way around actually succeeding also in strengthening the states.
Martin?
Yeah, obviously, the state at current in the Sahel may be an important part of the problem. But there will be no solution without the state in the Sahel either. So we need desperately to find ways of strengthening these states. And I do believe that we need to start looking at, instead of being so focused on everything that they are lacking and everything that is wrong, we need to start figuring out what is actually working here. Because there are certain things that do work. And maybe it's better to support those things that actually work, rather than being so focused on everything that they lack. And that may be, again, a stepping stone into sort of slowly and gradually building a stronger state here and consolidating these states. First at the center, but then quickly also in the interior that they need to be consolidated. And that is going to be a long way forward. We are going to have to be partner in that process for a long, long time. But on the other hand, they have to own it, because if they don't own it, it will just continue like it is today. And that is basically that Mali exists on artificial life support. And that is not a good place to be.
You had a comment.
Yeah, just the connection between working with government and working in local communities. I think you obviously you have to do both, and you have to look at government at all levels. I mean, the local government and the national government, and for example, in education, you have to work with the Ministry of Education in order to have sort of gender sensitive education, to give access to education for all girls, whether pregnant or not. All of these situations, you need to work with the ministry as well. And in some recommendations that several organizations, including Plan and UNICEF and the Malala Foundation, have made in order to sort of reopening, when the schools now are being opened again, this is one of the clear recommendations that you also need to work with the ministries to provide that basic right of education to all the children. But then again, also it's the element of the difference between the urban areas and the rural areas, because it's a vast difference. It has to do with access to everything, but also access to education, to digital tools, and also the awareness raising. Because I mean, for example, in Niger, top government has said that child marriage is they're really condemning it and speaking out loudly, which that's a good nice. It's a good step. It's important, but nobody listens to that. You go into the local communities and no one has even heard it. And we were sitting, for example, with some youth that we are working with in urban areas and in rural areas. I mean, these are plan projects, and the children in the capital in Niger, they don't know anyone who's been married off under the age of 18. They know it's a problem and they want to fight it. And these are probably the future leaders of Niger. But then you go into the communities, and then maybe all of the children or all of the girls have been married before they're 18. So there are huge differences. And so there's no way out of this other than working on all levels, actually. Yeah.
I think that point on sort of the intersectional vulnerability is also really important, because we know that, generally girls are more vulnerable than boys in humanitarian settings, but obviously there's a lot of other factors that come in when setting a person's vulnerability. There's no set vulnerability for a given group, right? So if you want to target then the very most vulnerable populations within a local community, how can you do that without sort of serving to reinforce social or ethnic divisions in already kind of conflict-torn local communities and where it's already difficult to work? We already have divisions between those populations, because I guess it could also be counterproductive if you're trying to target those very particular needs, but it's not like sort of a full community support. Do you have any reflections on that? What strategies that could be taken?
I would just come back to the basic, safe arena that's universal for everyone, or should be both safe and universal, which is schools.
Yeah.
And I really just, again, want to say thank you to Plan and the other civil society organizations for every day pushing that message forward. So the Safe Schools Declaration, the Safe Schools work, providing that platform for food security, for all kinds of security and for protection is extremely important. I think that is the common denominator in all the discussions that we have here today. And I also appreciate your intervention about the guidelines for safe return during the COVID-19 pandemic to school. I think that's also, we're looking into it, and it could be an important measure to make it more safe. So it all comes back to safe schools.
And a crisis like COVID-19 is also a moment to rethink and maybe build back equal, as we're trying to do now. I think on that note, we're going to do just a final round with ideas from the different panelists, from different points of views on the new Sahel strategy that NMFA is now working on that we'll be leading from the 3 years ahead, to see what kind of priorities should NMFA set. So we'll do that before closing. We could start with you, Kari-Helene.
Thank you. I mean, we'll have to come back to a lot of the things that have been mentioned during the debate now. But I mean, first and foremost, for us and for what Plan is working for, is the adolescent girls, to give them a voice, to listen to them, to actually, facilitate consultations, to have the voices heard, have them also be part of the triple nexus, like the triple nexus not just be a narrative, but actually something happening in actual reality, and including young people and especially the girls that no one listens to. Because we talk about them a lot here and we keep repeating ourselves, but it's because they're actually not heard and because the situation is dire. So I think that those are the main takeaways. And I think when it comes to the triple nexus in the rebuilding that into the strategy, it has a lot to do with donors, and it has a lot to do with where the money is going, because it is silos. It is silos even in Norway, where we have these open discussions and where we have easy access to government, to donors. It is still silos, and it is silos also from the NGOs. We can admit that, but at least we've talked about it enough. Now we need to make it actually move forward. And we're trying in our programming, but we need more help and need more actors to do it.
Fatim, could you also give your advice to the MFA on what they should prioritize in the new strategy?
Thank you, Angel. What I want to say, honestly, everything what we are saying now is around the peace building. One of the elements is if we can support to have really a peaceful countries, peaceful government, it is very, very important. Because when we are talking about the triple nexus, development, humanitarian, but at the end we need to connect all of this, recovery and also the resilience of these communities and young girls. The other thing is we need to take this crisis, not taking it in a different dimension, just taking it as a whole. We need to have a holistic approach, integrating all the dimension of this crisis. If we can treat it as well in the strategy, maybe we can be better, we can do better. And also the other thing is investing more in the young people, the young women, the young girls, giving them opportunities. This is very, very important. I talk about it because we need to put them in the center of what we are doing everywhere. We need also safe schools, because education is, I can say, is the backbone of everything. Because if we are not able to go to school, we have not safe schools, we can't say anything, because these girls, they need education. If we address the issue of education, you can address many things: earning money, avoiding early child marriage, avoiding FGM, and many other things. If we have safe schools, inclusive education, we can do it. The other element, what is not also the last one, is also taking account the skills and capacities of the local communities. Because now, from these studies and other elements, we saw that in the communities, people have capacities, they are able to do things, they are resilient. And we need just to make sure we have the right capacities, who know the Sahel and invest in them and do the things. Because it's not interesting having people outside and who can't do the job. If we have the skills in the right place, let us invest on them and let's do the things. These are some of my recommendations. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. That's just a tough competition. If you have some tough recommendations.
Yeah, no, I will be very brief. I think that the main issue in the short to medium term horizon is the security situation. And that whether we like it or not, I mean, that needs to be given some priority. That does not mean that one should stop doing other things, but one needs to find a way of dealing with a security situation that is immensely bad right now. One positive thing that is happening, or it's hard to say that fighting is positive, but I mean, I don't know if the world has not noticed this very much, but there has been hard fighting in central Mali between the Katiba Masina and Jenim on one side and the Islamic State Greater Sahara on the other side, suggesting that the Islamic State Greater Sahara is in the process of being pushed out of central Mali. This is important because, again, if there is any of these groups that you can negotiate with, it is the groups like the Katiba Masina, which has at least a slightly they are stronger with regard to a local foundation, and it's easier to if there is one group that you can negotiate with, it's this one, probably. So there may be a space of opportunity that can be grasped right now, but the only way to grasp that would be to start looking into the many local initiatives, many of them community-driven, that already has these levels of access of negotiations with these armed groups, and look at, is it possible to use some of these as platform for scaling up for a larger conversation? And there is a window of opportunity right now in Mali around these things. Yes, the coup has thrown all of these into uncertainty. On the other hand, I don't think that any of us is terribly sad that the former president had to go. He shouldn't have been forced to go the way he had to go, but it's not a great loss, actually. And there is a new window of opportunity.
Thanks. Marianne Hagen, do you want to comment on those inputs?
I want to thank all of you for your input on our new strategy. We will continue to have a holistic approach in the strategy. We will also continue to have a realistic view of what we can actually achieve on the ground. And I want to say that we are in the Sahel region for the long haul, and that we are that because the people deserve it, and we're there for the adolescent girl, together with our civil society partners.
Thank you. That's a wrap. To sum it up briefly, I might as well just use a quote of Mandela, who also previously said that Norway and other actors are really good at doing development aid in countries that need it the least. But in countries in the Sahel where the state is not functioning, it's not as easy. So I think that's also a key takeaway from here, that state building is really key. Also, the other quote from Martin Bøas, that it's difficult to say how to do it, but I hope that at least this discussion has given some new ideas, this experience sharing from different points of view. And I think one good starting point would be to start with listening to what adolescent girls say about what is needed in their local communities and what they do to strive to build safer communities for themselves and those around them. So thank you so much to our panelists and to all of those who have been following us online. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good day.
You too.